France has a population of 67 million people. It is undeniably a multicultural, multi-ethnic society. But just what does it mean to be French?
Well, French identity is a dynamic, changing thing. At times, it brings people together, like when France wins the World Cup. But at others, it's a divisive source of tension.
Join us for this French Connections Plus,
where we dive into French identity.
So how does it work, Flo? Who gets to be French?
Well, French nationality law has historically been based on the droit du sang. If you're born to a French parent, well, you're French.
The droit du sol, the right of the soil, also exists, but only in certain circumstances.
If you're born in France to foreign parents, you automatically become French at the age of 18, as long as you have lived 5 consecutive years in France after the age of 11.
That's what the law says, but when it comes to French identity, it's much more complex.
Modern French identity was forged in the flames of the French Revolution and the ideals of liberté, égalité, and fraternité, liberty, equality, and brotherhood. Now, France likes to think of itself as a colorblind republic. It treats all citizens as equal before the law and refuses to categorize them in terms of race, ethnicity, or religion. In fact, it scoffs at American-style multiculturalism.
The idea is you are a citizen of a secular republic above all else, but pretending that everyone is the same only allows discrimination to hide or even thrive.
Well, there are people in France who still cling to the idea that France is a predominantly white, predominantly Catholic country, and these people refuse to recognize that France has changed.
The problem is gathering some information by a census, for example, is just impossible.
It's illegal in France to collect statistics on ethnicity, race, and religion. Why is that? Well, for many people, collecting such data has a nasty echo of colonialism and the Vichy era, when France rounded up Jews during World War II.
That means that France can only estimate or at best guesstimate the makeup of its population. And that begs the question today, is France having an identity crisis?
Agnès Poirier, thank you so much for being on the show. You're a French journalist living between France and England, and you've written a lot about French identity. What do you think it means to be French?
That's the $1 million question. I think the answer to that is both very simple and quite complex. You know, what it is to be French, it is one language. I think the French language is key. And it is a set of values. And it is really about history. It's about a common history. And of course, we always go back to the French Revolution. So, it's a community, it's a destiny, it's a common destiny, basically. And then you make up your own identity within that very large frame. And that's the richness of a country. I mean, look at me, you know. My name comes from Poirier, is extremely French, comes from Brittany. I have African-American great-great-grandmother. I have Vietnamese, Jewish, Catholic, and Kabyle family. But, you know,
so you're very French.
And I am very French.
Would you say that France is afraid of American-style multiculturalism?
I don't think it's afraid of multiculturalism the way the British or the American know it. We just have a different model. The core idea, which is quite difficult to understand when you're British or American, is that, you know, in France, we don't like what divides us. We like to put the focus on what makes us part of the same community. We all have and enjoy the same rights and duties. And if you start talking about, because we're all different, so, you know, it goes without saying. But if every single one of us could have different rights because of our origins, then, you know, there's no country, there's no nation, there's no common destiny.
It's one thing to be French, it's another thing to feel French. And millions of people, often from immigrant origin, feel rejected by the dominant model in French society. Would you say that France is in the middle of an identity crisis?
I don't think there's an identity crisis in France more than there is one in our neighbouring, countries. I think it's a moment of crisis in the world, that's for sure. I think the dividing lines in French society are the same as they are in the West. We're facing poverty issues, education issues, generational issues, cultural issues. And France is not doing so badly if you consider it has the biggest Muslim and Jewish communities in the West. All in all, it's a country that works quite well. But the good thing about France is that we tend to be quite vocal about issues. So we take to the streets and we speak loudly, and that's a way of diffusing, actually, potential dangers. But it's something that you work on relentlessly and tirelessly.
Well, thank you so much, Agnès. We're going to have to leave it there.
Thank you.
At a time when France is facing divisions within itself, national symbols are even more important than before.
And these symbols were particularly visible in the wake of the 2015 terrorist attacks. Now, French flags, for instance, made a comeback into public space. A lot of people relearned the words to the national anthem. It seemed like French people needed to reclaim these symbols as a show of unity and also of defiance to fear.
Many of these symbols have their roots in the French Revolution, starting, of course, with the French flag.
Well, in many ways, the French flag is actually a visual representation of the revolution. White, for instance, was traditionally the color of royalty, of the ancient regime, and you can see it stuck between blue and red, the colors of the Paris militia, which was instrumental in storming La Bastille.
Which kicked off the French Revolution.
And also the French flag is taken to represent the motto of France, liberté, égalité, and fraternité.
Now, lots of countries, of course, have their own mottos, their own flags, their own anthems, but France also has a very personal symbol, and her name is Marianne.
Marianne is a familiar face in France. She's often depicted bare-breasted with a Frisian cap, like in Delacroix's famous painting from 1830, Liberty Leading the People. But Marianne was not a real woman. She's an allegory, a visual representation of democracy, the French Republic, and its values, liberty, equality, and fraternity. The exact origin of Marianne is uncertain. The names Marie and Anne were very popular among the lower class in the 18th century. In the lead-up to the revolution, Marianne came to symbolize the change of regime. Several real women have been chosen to lend their profile to Marianne, among them Brigitte Bardot, Catherine Deneuve, Laetitia Casta, and Sophie Marceau. These days, you'll find Marianne everywhere. There are statues of her in every town hall. She's on the national stamp and official government documents. Chances are you're even carrying her in your pocket, as she's on the French version of the euro coins.
National symbols have made a comeback in recent years, but not everyone's that into it.
Well, Genie, for a long time, these patriotic symbols have been associated with the far right. And so some people simply can't stand the French flag, or more so, the national anthem, La Marseillaise. They see it as grotesque nationalism, not patriotism.
The Marseillaise, in fact, started out as a war song, and it too has its roots in the French Revolution.
It was written in 1792 by Rouget de Lille after France declared war on Austria. Originally, it was called the War Song for the Rhine Army, but it got its nickname, La Marseillaise, after it was sung by volunteers from Marseille, the town in the south, when they marched in the capital.
Now, musically, it's very rousing, but its lyrics are pretty gruesome. In fact, it's known as the bloodiest national anthem around.
The Marseillaise is a revolutionary song. It's an anthem to freedom from tyranny. But what do the lyrics actually mean? And do people know them by heart? Let's quiz some of my colleagues here at France 24. Allons enfants de la patrie. Un, deux, trois, quatre. Allons enfants de la patrie.
Le jour de gloire est arrivé.
Contre nous de la tyrannie, l'étendard sanglant élevé.
L'étendard sanglant élevé.
Entendez-vous dans les campagnes
Rugir ces féroces soldats.
Qui vient jusque dans nos bras.
Égorgez vos femmes, vos fils et vos campagnes.
Aux armes, citoyens, formez vos bataillons.
Marchons,
marchons,
qu'un sang impur abreuve nos sillons. I really like the bit where it's talking about the impure blood watering the furrows. I think that's really just sums up France to me.
Quand sang impur abreuve nos sillons.
Slitting the throats of your sons and your wives, that's a pretty violent line.
This is gore.
The impure blood in that, in the Marseillaise refers to the invading armies invading France during the Revolution.
You got to put context. That was written during a war period in France, and that was a song to motivate the soldiers.
You know, we have to respect the moment and you know what they were going through at the time. So you know, blood and guts was the way it was.
Abreuve nos sillons. Ta, 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 ta.
Many of you sent in your questions about French identity and symbols, like Tony Pack. He says, why a rooster? And it's true, the US has the bald eagle, Russia has the bear. There are more glamorous symbols.
Well, there's a saying that France chose the rooster because it's the only bird that will sing with its feet in the muck. But the truth is that the Latin word for rooster, gallus, sounds exactly like the Latin word for the Gauls, the first French people. Now, though the rooster is used, it's actually not an official symbol of France.
Having said that, the French do love their rooster to the point where it's on all the World Cup shirts.
Cocorico. Now, Genie, I actually have a question for you because France allows dual citizenship. You're Franco-American. How easy is it to become French and how much paperwork is it?
There is a lot of paperwork. Apart from usual things like your proof of address or your birth certificate, you need your parents' birth certificates or their death certificate. You need tax payments. You even have to get your fingerprints taken to prove that you have a clean criminal record back home.
So that is a lot of paperwork, but once you get it all together, it's pretty straightforward if you've been living in France for 5 consecutive years legally, or if you're married to a French person. It's long, it's bureaucratic, but it can be done.
Now, there is one thing that's different compared to when I became a French citizen 10 years ago. Now you actually have to take a written civics and language test, proving just how important those things are here in France today. When I did it, someone just asked me what my favorite French dish was.
And what is it, Genie?
Boeuf bourguignon, bien sûr.
Well, that is delicious. Now, unfortunately, that's all we have time for, but please keep sending us your questions. You can tweet me at Villeminot. You can send us a message on Facebook, and we'll see you next time for French Connections Plus.
Vive la France!
Maidan Square in Kiev, Ukraine. The government has just authorized the police to open fire on pro-European protesters. The carnage leaves 80 people dead and hundreds wounded. That was 5 years ago. Today, our France 24 reporters are back in Kiev. What has become of the hopes of the protesters? Are the Ukrainians still fighting to join the European Union?
This week, we revisit Maidan, Independence Square in Kiev, Ukraine, for France 24.